The ancient stones of Ashcombe Keep, usually a source of comfort and unwavering strength, now seemed to breathe a subtle, chilling despair. Kessa felt it in the cold draft that whispered down the long, deserted corridors, in the oppressive weight of the high ceilings, and in the way the torchlight flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock her solitude. For years, the very air of this fortress had been imbued with the scent of her mate, Alpha King Beric Ashcombe, a potent mix of pine, damp earth, and an undeniable masculine power that had once been her anchor, her world. Now that familiar, comforting scent was fading, replaced by the acrid tang of unspoken truths and the suffocating odor of exclusion. The full moon, a silent silver eye, peered through the arched windows, its light a stark, unforgiving presence that illuminated the growing chasm in her heart, reflecting the inevitable isolation that was slowly, inexorably, tightening around her. She stood outside the heavy oak door of the council chamber, her hand hovering, not quite touching the cold, ornate brass. From within, the low murmur of male voices, thick with the weight of important discussions, reached her. Beric's voice, deep and resonant, was a steady undercurrent, a sound that had once soothed her restless spirit. Now each syllable was a barb, twisting in a wound that festered with every passing day. The whispers had started weeks ago, insidious as tendrils of mist creeping over the moors. First, it was the hushed tones that ceased abruptly when she approached, the sudden shifts in conversation, the careful avoidance of her gaze. Then it escalated. Meetings she wasn't invited to, strategic discussions held in chambers where her presence was suddenly deemed unnecessary, the casual camaraderie of his advisors turning into a rigid, uncomfortable silence in her presence. She was no longer queen, Luna, or mate. She was an outsider, an inconvenient presence. The bond, that primal, unbreakable thread woven between their very souls, was not merely strained, it was bleeding. She felt each severance, each deliberate act of withholding, as a physical ache deep within her chest. It was a phantom limb of connection, throbbing with a pain only she could perceive. Her inner wolf, usually a fierce, proud entity, whimpered in confusion and despair, unable to comprehend the rejection from its own alpha. How could her mate, the one whose essence was intertwined with hers, systematically dismantle the very foundation of their shared existence? With a resolve born of desperation, Kessa finally pushed the door open. The immediate cessation of all sound was a physical shock, an abrupt silence that resonated with the force of a thunderclap. 6 pairs of eyes, belonging to Beric's most trusted council members and the captains of his guard, swiveled towards her. Their faces, a tableau of carefully schooled neutrality, betrayed nothing, yet spoke volumes. The scent of fear, sharp and metallic, spiked in the air, mingling with the lingering notes of parchment, ink, and the earthy musk of powerful males. It was a fear not of her, but for themselves, a fear of stepping out of line, of acknowledging her presence in a way that might displease their king. Beric sat at the head of the immense oak table, a formidable figure even in repose. A detailed map of the northern wilds lay spread before him, his large, scarred hands resting on its edge. His dark hair, usually sleek, was slightly disheveled, hinting at hours spent poring over strategy. His eyes, the color of a stormy winter sea, met hers. Once they had held oceans of affection, a silent language only she understood. Tonight they were cold, distant, and utterly devoid of warmth, like polished stones. Kessa, he stated, his voice a low, even rumble, utterly devoid of the usual endearment, the subtle softening that always accompanied her name when he spoke it. It was a formal address, a stark declaration of distance. She forced a smile to her lips, feeling the tremor in her hand, the sudden chill that spread through her veins. "My king," she replied, her voice a little too high, a little too breathless. "I merely wished to inquire if you required anything." "It grows late and you have been in council for hours." It was a transparent excuse, a pathetic attempt to reclaim some shred of her former standing, to pierce the impenetrable wall he had erected. Gareth, the hulking captain of the guard, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gaze flicking anxiously between Kessa and Beric. The others remained frozen, their expressions unreadable. The oppressive tension in the room was a living entity, heavy and suffocating. Beric's jaw tightened, a muscle flexing almost imperceptibly. "We are discussing matters of grave importance, Kessa, matters that require our full and undivided attention." He didn't elaborate, didn't offer a single detail of the grave importance. He didn't invite her to stay, didn't even glance at the empty chair beside him, the one that had always been hers, reserved for his Luna. The word undivided hung in the air, a thinly veiled accusation, a subtle but undeniable dismissal. It was a blunt force trauma to her heart. Kessa felt the heat rise in her cheeks, a flush of mortification that burned her skin. She was not just uninvited, she was an impediment, a distraction. Her wolf, usually so deeply buried, let out a silent, pained howl, a primal protest against the utter rejection. The alpha of her soul was turning his back. Of course, she whispered, the word tasting like ashes on her tongue. She looked at him one last time, her gaze pleading, searching for any flicker of the mate she had loved, the man who had once promised to share every burden, every secret. There was nothing, only the cold, impassive mask of a king who no longer saw her as his partner. She turned to leave, her back stiff, her shoulders squared, fighting against the crushing weight of humiliation that threatened to buckle her knees. She refused to let them see her break. As her hand reached for the doorknob, she heard Barrick's voice again, colder, sharper this time, cutting through the silence like a knife. Captain Gareth, ensure our patrols are doubled along the northern pass. We cannot afford any further complications. Complications. The word echoed in her mind, a devastating judgment. Was she the complication? Was her presence, her love, her very existence a problem he needed to manage, to eliminate? The implication was a brutal kick to her soul. Kessa's fingers clenched on the cold brass, her knuckles white. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The tears were burning behind her eyelids, and the wound in her bond was no longer bleeding. It was gushing, tearing apart the very fabric of her existence. She closed the door softly, deliberately, cutting herself off from the muffled sounds of their resumed discussion, from the world she had once belonged to. The questions clawed at her, sharp and merciless. What secret could possibly justify this cruelty? What darkness had consumed the man she loved, turning him into a stranger, who regarded her as nothing more than a complication? A terrifying premonition tightened its icy grip around her heart, whispering that the answer would shatter her world entirely. The closing of the council chamber door was not a gentle thud, but a decisive clang that resonated through Kessa's very bones, severing her from the last vestiges of her former life. The silence of the corridor that greeted her was not peaceful, but a deafening roar in her ears, amplified by the frantic beat of her own heart. The air, thin and cold, seemed to press in on her, stealing her breath. She walked, a phantom in her own home, the elaborate tapestries on the walls, depicting triumphant Ashcombe alphas and their proud lunas, mocking her with their vibrant, unbroken bonds. Each step echoed her growing despair, a hollow sound against the polished stone. Complications. The word replayed in her mind, a venomous whisper, branding her, shaming her. What had she become to the man who had once knelt before her, swearing his life, his pack, his very soul to her? Reaching her private chambers, a suite that once pulsed with the warmth of their shared life, Kessa found it as cold and desolate as her heart. The embers in the hearth had long since died, leaving only a faint scent of ash and the lingering chill of disuse. She lit a single candle, its flame dancing nervously, throwing long, distorted shadows across the familiar room. Her fingers brushed over the heavy velvet drapes, then traced the intricate carvings of their bedpost. Where Barrick's scent, usually so potent, was now barely a ghost, an almost imperceptible whisper of what had been. Memories, sharp and painful, flooded her senses. Barrick's strong arms around her, the rough silk of his hair against her cheek, the deep rumble of his laughter filling this very room, the shared silences pregnant with unspoken understanding. Each memory was a stab, a reminder of the vibrant, thriving bond that was now withering, bleeding out. She sank onto the window seat, gazing out at the moonlit courtyards, where the stark silhouettes of the sentry towers stood guard. Her wolf, usually a steady, comforting presence, was a tight knot of anxiety in her gut, a low, constant thrum of distress. It paced restlessly within her, sensing the immense rupture, the inexplicable betrayal. "He is our alpha," it whimpered. "Why does he cast us out?" Kessa had no answer. She had always been a quiet Luna, her strength found in her unwavering support, her keen intuition, her ability to read the subtle currents of the pack. She was not a warrior queen, nor a fierce huntress, but a grounding force, a calm center. Had that not been enough? Had Barrick tired of her steady presence, Her quiet counsel, her devotion? The thought twisted her gut, a bitter, sour taste in her mouth. The next morning, the echoes of her humiliation followed her like a shadow. As she moved through the keep, the usual greetings from the servants were hesitant, their eyes flicking away from hers. The guards, normally quick with a respectful nod, now averted their gazes, their shoulders stiff. The very air around her felt charged with unspoken pity and thinly veiled speculation. She was no longer just the Luna. She was the Luna in exile, a queen stripped of her unspoken power, her status crumbling before the eyes of her own court. The raw shame of it burned, making her long to retreat, to hide in the deepest shadows of the keep and never emerge. But her innate dignity, that stubborn ember of pride, refused to allow it. She walked with her head held high, her spine straight, even as her heart felt like a shattered mosaic. Later that day, driven by an unbearable restlessness, Kessa found herself in the ancient library, a vast chamber filled with the scent of aged parchment and forgotten lore. She didn't seek a specific text. She sought refuge, a place where the pervasive whispers of the court could not reach her. As she ran her fingers over the spines of leather-bound books, a faint, almost imperceptible scent caught her attention, a trace of Barrick's unique musk, overlaid with something else, something unfamiliar and subtly unsettling. It was a fresh, crisp scent, like mountain air in something metallic, a scent she had never associated with the inner circle of Ashcombe. She followed the scent, her heart quickening, her senses on high alert. It led her to a secluded alcove, behind a towering shelf of ancient histories. There, half hidden by a heavy velvet curtain, was a small, crudely carved wooden box. It was unlike anything in the meticulously curated royal collection, its craftsmanship rough, almost wild. Kessa's fingers trembled as she reached for it. It was locked, but the faint scent seemed to emanate directly from it. Who owned this? Why was it hidden here? And why did Barrick's scent linger so faintly around it, mingling with that strange metallic tang? A sudden sound, a low thrum of voices from the main library, startled her. She quickly replaced the curtain, stepping back just as Barrick's deep voice resonated through the shelves. The old texts speak of it, Captain. The Luna's blood is paramount. Kessa froze, her breath catching in her throat. The Luna's blood. Her blood. A cold dread seeped into her, chilling her to the bone. She pressed herself against the shelves, barely daring to breathe, listening intently. But King Barrick, another voice sharp and unfamiliar, responded. The prophecy is ancient, and its demands barbaric. Are we truly to consider such a thing? Barrick's reply was a low growl, devoid of patience. We consider every option, Lorien. The blight spreads. Ashcombe will not fall on my watch. If the legends hold true, if the old magic can be awakened, then sacrifices must be made. The blood drained from Kessa's face. Sacrifices, old magic, blight. What horrors were they discussing? And why was her Luna's blood paramount? The unfamiliar voice, Lorien, was new. She had never heard him before. He wasn't one of Barrick's usual advisors. Who was he, and what hold did he have over her mate that he spoke of ancient prophecies and barbaric demands? Barrick's tone, so grim and resolute, sent shivers down her spine. The distant alpha she had encountered last night was not merely cold. He was ruthless, driven by a desperate, terrifying agenda. He was willing to make sacrifices. Her mind reeled. The exclusion, the coldness, the word complications. It all began to coalesce into a terrifying new shape. This wasn't just about a fractured bond or a cooling affection. This was about something far darker, something that threatened not just her place by his side, but her very essence. The scent of fear, which had been a constant companion since last night, intensified, now laced with the metallic tang of impending doom. She felt an uncontrollable tremor begin in her hands, spreading rapidly through her body. Her wolf whimpered again, but this time it was a sound of primal terror, a guttural warning that danger, profound and devastating, was not just approaching, but had already claimed her. She had to know more, had to understand what sacrifices meant, before she became one herself. The words, "The Luna's blood is paramount," echoed in Kessa's mind, a chilling mantra that drowned out the frantic thrum of her own heartbeat. The scent of fear, now a permanent resident in her nostrils, mingled with the faint metallic tang that clung to the hidden wooden box, her blood, her life. The implication was a monstrous, unthinkable betrayal, yet it resonated with every cold glance, every closed door, every whispered dismissal. The love she held for Beric, a steadfast flame that had endured years of kingship and shadowed decisions, flickered violently, threatened by a tempest of terror and profound disillusionment. Her wolf, usually a source of quiet strength, was a panicked snarl in her soul, demanding flight, demanding answers. How could the mate who swore to protect her with his very life now contemplate her sacrifice? She waited until the library was deserted, the last scholarly guard making his rounds, his footsteps fading into the labyrinthine quiet of the keep. The full weight of the hunter's moon, a colossal blood-orange orb, pressed against the high windows, its light casting the library in an eerie spectral glow. It was a primal light, the kind that stirred the deepest instincts, promising both power and peril. Tonight, it felt like a silent witness to a looming horror. Kessa returned to the alcove, her fingers trembling as she pulled back the velvet curtain. The wooden box, crudely carved with symbols she didn't recognize, seemed to pulse with a faint, malevolent energy. She knelt, examining it closely. There was no visible lock, no keyhole. Her fingers traced the rough carvings, intertwining roots, jagged lightning bolts, and a central symbol that looked distressingly like a stylized drop of blood contained within a crescent moon. A wave of nausea washed over her. The faint metallic scent was stronger here, almost coppery, like old blood. She pressed her ear to the wood, hearing nothing but the frantic pulse in her own temples. Beric's scent, so faint before, seemed to have completely vanished from the box, leaving only the unsettling, new aroma. It was a deliberate cleansing, a careful erasure. Her mate was hiding this from her, and the thought was a fresh, agonizing wound. With renewed determination, Kessa ran her hands over every inch of the box, searching for a seam, a hidden catch. Her fingertips brushed against a slightly raised panel on the underside. She pressed it, and with a soft click, the lid sprang open. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried, unfamiliar herbs that smelled faintly of decay and something sickly sweet, lay a single ancient scroll. Its parchment was brittle, yellowed with age, and covered in an archaic script she couldn't decipher. Beside it, glinting dully, was a small ceremonial silver dagger, its blade intricately etched with the same symbols found on the box, the roots, the lightning, the blood moon. The air around the dagger felt cold, heavy, humming with an unseen power. It was a ritualistic blade she knew instinctively, designed not for battle, but for sacrifice. Her breath hitched. This was it. This was the instrument of her undoing. Her eyes fell back to the scroll. Though the script was unknown, there was an accompanying series of crude, powerful illustrations. The first depicted a land ravaged by darkness, leafless trees, sickened animals, and a shadowed figure of immense power looming over all. The second, beneath the ominous depiction of a blighted land, showed a regal female figure, a Luna, standing before a towering, gnarled tree, her hand outstretched, blood dripping from her palm onto its roots. The third image showed the tree bursting into vibrant life, the darkness receding, and the blight dissolving under the benevolent light of a full moon. The last image depicted the Luna, now radiant and strong, surrounded by a thriving pack, the blight banished. Her gaze fixed on the second image, specifically the Luna's hand, the crimson droplets falling onto the roots. The Luna's blood is paramount. The words echoed again, no longer a whisper, but a shout in her soul. It was undeniable. The blight, this ancient evil, required the sacrifice of a Luna. A sudden sharp memory pierced through her fear. Beric, years ago, under a similar hunter's moon, his hand gently tracing the curve of her jaw, his eyes alight with love. "My Kessa," he'd whispered, his voice thick with devotion. "You are the heart of this pack, my Luna, my world. I will never let harm touch you." The memory was a cruel phantom limb of joy, intensifying the agony of the present. How could that man, her alpha, stand by and allow this? Or worse, orchestrate it? Was his love a lie, or was he so desperate, so consumed by the blight, that he would sacrifice even her? Leaving the box open, the scroll and dagger exposed, Kessa fled the library, her legs carrying her on instinct. She needed to see the blight for herself, to understand the desperation that could drive Beric to such a monstrous act. She found herself in the central courtyard, where the oppressive weight of the hunter's moon seemed to pull at the very fabric of reality. The usually vibrant, well-tended gardens of the keep were sickly, the rose bushes withered, their leaves coated in a strange grayish film. Even the ancient oak at the center of the courtyard, a symbol of Ashcomb's enduring strength, seemed to sag. Its branches brittle, its bark peeling. The blight was real, a creeping rot that slowly devoured life. As she stood there, a sudden guttural roar pierced the night. It wasn't the sound of an animal, but of a shifter in agony. Kessa's head snapped toward the sound, her heart leaping into her throat. It came from the direction of the infirmary, usually a place of quiet healing. Before she could process the implications, a figure emerged from the shadows of the infirmary entrance. Lorien, the sharp-voiced advisor, his face grim, his usually immaculate robes stained with what looked like dark, dried blood. Behind him, 2 guards struggled to contain a thrashing, whimpering shifter, his body contorted, his fur matted and dull, his eyes milky white with madness. The air around them was thick with a sickly sweet scent, the same scent that emanated from the herbs in the box, now stronger, tinged with the metallic tang of blood and something else. Something rotten. Lorien's gaze, cold and assessing, swept over Kessa, lingering on her for a fraction of a second too long. There was no surprise in his eyes, only a knowing calculation that sent a fresh wave of terror through her. He had known she would be here. He had expected her to discover the truth. He merely nodded to the struggling guards, a silent command for them to drag the afflicted shifter away. Deeper into the keep's hidden cells, no doubt. The implication was clear. The blight was not just killing the land, it was driving the pack members mad, turning them into rabid, broken creatures. As Lorien turned to follow, his gaze flicked back to Kessa, a ghost of a smirk playing on his lips. "A pity, Luna," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the night like a shard of ice. "Such a beautiful sacrifice." The words were a death knell. Kessa felt the blood drain from her face, her knees threatening to buckle. He knew, he had known all along, and Barrick, her mate, her alpha, was complicit. The hunter's moon, now high in the sky, seemed to mock her, its light a spotlight on her impending doom. The primal terror in her wolf erupted into a full, silent scream. She was trapped, a lamb led to slaughter, and the shepherd was the very man who had once vowed to protect her. Her world had not just shattered, it was dissolving into a nightmare, and the night was just beginning. Lorien's words, "A pity, Luna, such a beautiful sacrifice," were a death knell in the oppressive silence of the moonlit courtyard. They didn't just echo in Kessa's ears, they resonated deep within her bones, a seismic shock that shattered the last shards of her broken world. The very air seemed to thicken, heavy with the sickly sweet scent of the blight and the metallic tang of blood, a smell that now clung to her like a shroud. Her wolf, no longer merely whimpering, let out a silent primal scream of terror and rage, demanding that she run, fight, survive. This wasn't a misunderstanding, a cooling of affection, or a political maneuver. This was a calculated, cold-blooded plot, and she was its unwitting centerpiece. Barrick, her mate, her alpha, was not just complicit. He was the architect of her impending demise. Her legs, stiff with shock, carried her instinctively away from the courtyard, away from Lorien's chilling gaze. She fled back into the shadowed labyrinth of the keep, her mind a frantic whirl of terror and disbelief. Every creaking floorboard, every distant hoot of an owl, every gust of wind through the ancient stones became a harbinger of doom. She could no longer see the familiar halls. She saw only a maze, closing in, designed to trap her. The images from the scroll flashed before her eyes. The ravaged land, the Luna's blood dripping onto the tree, the silver dagger. The reality of it was more horrific than any nightmare she could have conjured. She found herself back in her chambers, the single candle she'd lit earlier having burned down to a guttering stub, plunging the room into deeper shadows. The cold had seeped into her bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the winter night. She paced, a caged animal, her heart hammering against her ribs, her breath ragged. How could she have been so blind? All the signs, the exclusion, the coldness, the word complications, they weren't meant to push her away, but to soften her, to isolate her, to prepare her for this ultimate betrayal. A desperate resolve began to harden within her. She would not be a sacrifice. Not for the blight, not for Barrick's kingdom, and certainly not for the man who had discarded her. She had to escape. But escape where? Ashcombe Keep was a fortress, surrounded by miles of wild, blighted lands. And even if she made it out, where would a Luna, stripped of her mate's protection, go? The thought was terrifying, yet less so than the alternative. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky in hues of bruised purple and gray, Kessa made a decision. She would confront him. She had to know if there was any flicker of the man she loved left, any shred of humanity that could explain this monstrosity. She would not go as a victim, but as a queen demanding answers. She found Barrick in his private study, a room usually reserved for his most solitary meditations. He was seated at his massive desk, poring over maps, his brow furrowed, a half-empty goblet of wine at his elbow. The room smelled of old leather, ink, and the lingering, faded scent of him. He looked utterly exhausted, lines of worry etched deep around his eyes, his shoulders slumped with the weight of unseen burdens. For a fleeting moment, her heart ached with the familiar tenderness, a desperate longing for the man she once knew. But then Lorien's words, and the image of the silver dagger, flared in her mind, hardening her resolve. He looked up as she entered, his head snapping towards her, his expression a mixture of surprise and a weariness that seemed to pull at his very soul. There was no warmth, no welcome, only that impenetrable mask she had grown to dread. "Kessa," he said, his voice rough, as if he hadn't spoken in hours. "You are up early." It was a statement, not a question. She walked towards his desk, her gaze unwavering, forcing herself to meet his cold stare. "I know," she began, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. "I know about the blight, and I know about the prophecy." Barrick froze, his hand tightening on the edge of the map. His eyes, usually so controlled, flickered with something she couldn't quite decipher. Surprise, yes, but also a flash of pain, swiftly suppressed. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice low, dangerous. "Don't insult me, Barrick," she retorted, her voice gaining strength, fueled by a potent mix of terror and righteous fury. "I saw the scroll, I saw the dagger, I heard you and Lorien. The Luna's blood is paramount. What does that mean, Barrick? Am I to be sacrificed for your kingdom? For your blight?" The words were out, sharp and accusatory, leaving a bitter taste in her mouth. He rose slowly, his towering frame casting a long shadow over her. His eyes were like chips of ice, but she saw something else there, something fleeting and deeply wounded. "You should not have meddled, Kessa. This is not your concern." "Not my concern," she cried, a hysterical laugh bubbling up, quickly choked off by a sob. "My life is not my concern. My blood is not my concern. The Luna of Ashcombe, your mate, is to be sacrificed, and it is not my concern." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "Barrick, look at me. Look at the woman you swore to cherish, to protect. Tell me this isn't true. Tell me you wouldn't allow such a barbaric act." He stared at her, his jaw clenching. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, filled only with the frantic thrum of her heart. For a moment, a flicker of something raw and exposed crossed his face. A deep agony, a profound regret. She saw it just for a second. The Barrick she knew, the man capable of immense love and sacrifice. Hope, foolish and fragile, dared to bloom in her chest. Then the mask slammed back down, harder, colder than before. "The blight is consuming our lands, Kessa. Our people are falling ill, succumbing to madness. The crops rot, the forests die. Ashcombe will perish if nothing is done. The ancient texts, they offer a solution, a desperate one perhaps, but a solution nonetheless." His voice was devoid of emotion, a flat declaration of duty. "My duty is to my kingdom, to my pack, above all else." "And I am nothing?" she whispered, tears finally tracing hot paths down her cheeks. "Our bond, our life together, it means nothing?" He took a step towards her, his hand reaching out, then stopping, hovering in the air between them, as if he couldn't bring himself to touch her. His eyes, however, seemed to burn with a fierce, suppressed emotion. "It means everything," he rasped, his voice cracking, betraying the carefully constructed facade. "More than you could ever know, but some choices, some burdens, are too heavy to share." His words, meant perhaps as a twisted reassurance, only twisted the knife deeper. He was admitting it. He was choosing the kingdom over her, over their bond, over her very life. He was asking her to be the sacrifice, cloaking it in the guise of a king's burden. "Then this is goodbye," Kessa said, her voice hollow, devoid of tears. The pain was too profound for tears now. It was a cold, hard knot in her chest. "Because I will not be your sacrifice, Barrick. Not for you, not for your kingdom, and certainly not for this blight." She turned to leave, her heart a desolate wasteland. But as her hand reached the door, Beric's voice stopped her, colder, harder than she had ever heard it. You will not leave, Kessa. You cannot. This keep is now sealed. Every exit, every hidden path is guarded. And if you attempt to escape, you will be brought back, alive if possible. But you will fulfill your destiny, Luna. One way or another, the finality of his words, the grim, unyielding resolution in his voice, hit her with the force of a physical blow. She was trapped, a prisoner in her own home, destined for a ritualistic death at the hands of her own mate. The sun had risen fully, but for Kessa, the world had plunged into an eternal night. Her wolf howled, a desperate, mournful sound, recognizing the inescapable cage they were now in. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a death sentence. And the true horror was, she still saw the flicker of pain in his eyes, a desperate king sacrificing everything, even his soul, for his people. But that understanding did nothing to lessen the terror. It only made the impending sacrifice 1,000 times more agonizing. Beric's words, cold and unyielding, echoed in the silent chambers of Kessa's mind. You will fulfill your destiny, Luna, one way or another. The threat was not merely a sentence. It was a cage, slamming shut around her, sealing her fate within the very walls that had once been her sanctuary. The keep, once a symbol of power and protection, now felt like a tomb, each stone imbued with an oppressive weight, each shadow a lurking menace. The faint scent of the blight, a sickly sweet decay, seemed to seep through the ancient mortar, clinging to the air, a constant reminder of the monstrous bargain her mate was willing to make. Her wolf, a frantic, trapped beast within her, clawed at the edges of her consciousness, its silent howls a symphony of terror and impotent rage. She tried the doors of her suite, then the windows. They were locked, bolted from the outside, and reinforced with a heavy iron bar. Guards, she knew, would be stationed outside, their unseen presence a suffocating cloak of surveillance. Her world had shrunk to these opulent yet stifling rooms. The tapestries, depicting proud Ashcombe Lunas standing beside their powerful alphas, now seemed to mock her, their woven smiles frozen in an era of unbroken bonds and unwavering trust. Kessa paced, her silk gown rustling softly, the sound a stark counterpoint to the tempest raging within her. Despair threatened to consume her, a dark viscous tide pulling her under. But beneath the despair, a stubborn ember of defiance flickered, fueled by the primal instinct of her wolf. She would not go meekly to her death. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of fear and vigilance. Meals were brought by silent servants who refused to meet her gaze, their faces carefully blank. She found no solace in food, the taste of ash and bitter betrayal coating her tongue. Sleep was a restless, fitful thing, haunted by nightmares of the silver dagger, of Beric's cold eyes, of the blighted land consuming her. Her senses, heightened by fear, perceived every creak of the old keep, every distant murmur, every shift in the wind outside. She spent hours at the window, staring out at the blighted gardens, the sickly gray of the leaves a stark mirror of her own fading hope. The ancient oak, once so vibrant, now looked like a skeletal hand reaching for a sky that offered no mercy. One evening, as twilight bled across the sky, painting the clouds in bruised purples and blood oranges, Kessa heard a new sound, a low guttural moan followed by a frantic scuffling. It came from the lower levels of the keep, beneath her very chambers. Her wolf stiffened, a low growl rumbling in her chest. This was not the howl of a healthy wolf, nor the cry of a human. This was the sound of something broken, something in torment. Driven by a desperate need for answers, for understanding, Kessa pressed her ear to the cold stone floor, straining to hear. The sounds were faint, muffled by the thick walls, but undeniable. Whimpers, choked sobs, and then Beric's voice, deep and resonant, laced with a raw grief she hadn't heard in years. He was speaking to someone, or something, in hushed, urgent tones. And then the unmistakable, sickly sweet scent of the blight intensified, mingling with a sharp tang of ozone and a faint metallic odor. It was the same scent that emanated from the herbs in the box, now far stronger, almost overwhelming. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was more than just a blight on the land. It was affecting the pack, transforming them, driving them mad. Was Beric down there, witnessing the horrors firsthand? Was this the source of his desperation, his willingness to sacrifice everything, even her? Later that night, unable to sleep, Kessa huddled by the cold hearth, her mind racing. She was not just a prisoner, she was a witness to Barrick's internal torment, to the slow, agonizing death of his pack, and to the horrific solution he planned. She closed her eyes, trying to conjure the image of the Barrick she had loved, the fierce, protective alpha who would have torn the world apart to keep her safe. But the image was fractured, overlaid with the cold, unyielding face of the king who had condemned her. Suddenly, a faint, rhythmic tapping reached her ears. It was coming from the wall behind the hearth. Kessa froze, every nerve alert. It wasn't the creaking of old timber or the settling of stone. It was deliberate, a pattern, tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 pause, tap. A coded message? Her heart leaped. Could it be? Was there someone else in the keep who questioned Barrick's actions? She pressed her ear to the cold stone. The tapping repeated, clearer now. It was too faint to determine a specific message, but the intent was unmistakable. Hope, a fragile, dangerous thing, unfurled within her. She was not entirely alone. Someone was trying to reach her. The next morning, Kessa felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would not wait for her fate. She would fight. She began to meticulously examine her chambers, searching for any weakness, any hidden passage, any clue she might have overlooked. She ran her hands over every stone, every panel, every inch of the intricately carved wood. She scrutinized the tapestries, looking for loose threads, concealed seams. Her enhanced senses, usually dulled by her human form, were now keenly awake, her wolf urging her on. As she ran her fingers along the base of the massive stone fireplace, a section of the hearth felt subtly different, colder, and with a faint, almost imperceptible seam where the stone met the floor. She pushed, pulled, and pressed, her muscles straining. Nothing. She felt a surge of frustration, but then she remembered the tapping. It had come from behind the hearth. She moved to the side, examining the wall of the chimney stack. Her fingers brushed against a small, loose stone, cleverly disguised by centuries of dust and grime. She wiggled it, and with a soft grate, it came free. Behind it, not a passage, but a small, dark recess. Her fingers delved into the opening, encountering a folded piece of parchment. Her heart pounded as she pulled it out. It was old, but not ancient, the paper thick and slightly yellowed. The script was familiar, a hand she knew well, Gareth's, captain of the guard, the burly man who had shifted uncomfortably in the council chamber. The message was short, terse, and chilling. Luna, the king's desperation grows. The blight consumes his reason. Lorien manipulates him with whispers of ancient power. The ritual is set for the coming solstice, 3 nights from now. He believes you will save us. Many of us do not. We cannot act openly, but we will not see you sacrificed. Seek the old tunnels beneath the infirmary. A single guard loyal to the old ways will be there. His name is Rorik. He knows the hidden paths. Be ready at moonrise on the solstice. It is your only chance. G. Kessa reread the message, her hands trembling. Solstice, 3 nights. The enormity of it almost buckled her knees. Gareth, a loyal guard, a hidden passage beneath the infirmary. Her mind raced, piecing together the fragments. Lorien, the blight, Barrick's agonizing choice. It was all coming to a head. Gareth's note was a lifeline, a desperate plea, and a stark confirmation of her impending doom. The knowledge that not everyone in the pack agreed with Barrick's monstrous plan ignited a fierce spark within her. She wasn't entirely alone, but the note also contained a new, terrifying revelation. He believes you will save us. Barrick truly believed this sacrifice was for the good of his pack, that she would be their savior. He wasn't just a cruel king. He was a deluded one, driven to unimaginable lengths by the blight and Lorien's insidious influence. This made him even more dangerous, more unyielding. He wouldn't just allow her to be taken, he would actively participate, believing it his solemn duty. Kessa carefully folded the note and tucked it into her gown, her gaze fixed on the moonlit window. The solstice. 3 nights. The hunter's moon, now a full, luminous orb, seemed to hover, watchful and foreboding. She had a chance, a sliver of hope, but the path ahead was fraught with peril, betrayal, and the agonizing knowledge that to save herself, she would have to defy the man she had loved, the king who had sworn to protect her, and perhaps the very destiny he had imposed upon her. The wolf within her, no longer whimpering, let out a fierce, silent snarl. It was time to fight for her life. The weight of Gareth's note, tucked against Kessa's skin, was a constant, burning presence, a stark counterpoint to the chilling reality of her confinement. 3 nights from now, the solstice. Your only chance. The words had etched themselves into her soul, a desperate countdown to either freedom or an unimaginable horror. Each sunrise felt like a cruel mockery, each sunset a step closer to her inevitable fate. The keep, once a bastion of warmth and belonging, had transformed into a cage, its ancient stones whispering of doom, its shadowed corners teeming with unseen eyes. Her wolf, usually a quiet, comforting presence, now thrummed with a coiled tension, its instincts screaming for survival, for escape, for the primal right to live. The introspection was relentless, a churning maelstrom of conflicting emotions. How could Barrick, the man whose scent had been her home, whose touch had ignited her very being, orchestrate such a monstrous betrayal? She replayed every cold glance, every distant word, every closed door, searching for a sign, a hint of the true Barrick beneath the king's hardened facade. Gareth's words, "The king's desperation grows, the blight consumes his reason," offered a sliver of terrifying understanding. Was he truly so consumed, so lost to the encroaching darkness, that he saw her not as his mate, but as a mere tool, a necessary sacrifice? The thought twisted her gut, a knot of grief and rage. It was a betrayal compounded by a profound pity, a realization that the man she loved was himself a victim, even as he wielded the blade. This complex sorrow only deepened her resolve. She would not be an unwitting pawn in his desperate, misguided game. The day of the solstice dawned with a grim, heavy sky, mirroring the oppressive atmosphere within Ashcombe Keep. The air itself felt thick with unspoken dread, a pervasive silence broken only by the mournful howl of the winter wind rattling the high windows. Every shadow seemed to deepen, every sound to amplify. Kessa moved through her chambers with a heightened awareness, her senses preternaturally sharp. The scent of her guards, a faint metallic musk, lingered just beyond her door, a constant reminder of her imprisonment. She could almost taste their vigilance, feel their unspoken commands. Her own scent, usually subtle, now seemed to betray her, a beacon in the oppressive quiet. She spent the day in a carefully constructed calm, eating the meager meal, pretending to read, appearing as a Luna resigned to her fate. But beneath the facade, her heart hammered a frantic rhythm, counting down the hours, the minutes. As the sun dipped below the jagged peaks of the western marches, painting the sky in violent streaks of crimson and bruised purple, the hunter's moon began its ascent. Tonight it was a colossal orb, bleeding light into the encroaching darkness, its powerful luminescence seeming to pierce through stone and flesh alike. This was it, the solstice, the night of her supposed sacrifice, the night of her desperate bid for freedom. With the last sliver of natural light fading, Kessa prepared. She discarded her silk gown, choosing instead a simple dark tunic and sturdy breeches, the kind worn by the stable hands, stolen from a forgotten trunk in her wardrobe. She braided her long dark hair tightly, securing it at the nape of her neck. Her movements were precise, quiet, each action imbued with a primal urgency. She took only a small leather pouch, containing a few dried rations and a flint and steel, tucked securely inside her tunic. Her hands, usually delicate, felt strong, capable. Her wolf, now fully awakened, surged within her, a silent, powerful force guiding her every move. The hour of moonrise arrived, painting her chamber in an eerie, silver glow. The guards outside would be changing shifts, a brief window of vulnerability. Moving with the silent grace of a predator, Kessa located the loose stone behind the hearth. Her fingers, accustomed to the silk of tapestries, deftly pried it free. The small, dark recess yawned open, revealing the hidden passage. The air that wafted from it was cold, stale, and smelled faintly of damp earth and ancient dust, a scent of forgotten places, of secrets buried deep. She squeezed through the narrow opening, the rough stones scraping against her skin, the darkness engulfing her. Her wolf's eyes, unseen by human vision, adjusted quickly, discerning the faint outlines of the tunnel. It was a tight, winding path, barely wide enough for her shoulders, carved roughly from the bedrock. The air grew heavier, colder, the sound of her own breathing echoing unnervingly. She could hear the faint drip of water somewhere ahead, the scuttling of unseen creatures. Every nerve ending was alive, sensitive to the subtle shifts in the stone, the faint currents of air. The tunnel sloped downwards, deeper into the earth, deeper beneath the foundations of the keep. She moved with a silent, measured pace, her hands brushing against the cold, rough walls, feeling for footholds, for obstacles. The passage branched, then branched again, a dizzying maze. But her wolf, guided by an instinct far older than conscious thought, seemed to know the way, pulling her towards the faint, distant scent of the infirmary, a mix of medicinal herbs, fear, and that underlying sickly sweet tang of the blight. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the tunnel widened. Kessa paused, listening. A faint rhythmic sound reached her ears, a steady, measured breathing and the clink of metal. She crept forward, her heart thundering. The tunnel opened into a small circular chamber, lit by a single hooded lantern. A figure sat on a rough-hewn stone bench, his back to her, meticulously sharpening a hunting knife. It was Rorik, his broad shoulders hunched, his movements slow and deliberate. His scent was strong, earthy, and undeniably loyal. "Rorik," she whispered, her voice hoarse. He stiffened, then slowly turned. His face, scarred and weathered, held a surprising tenderness as his eyes met hers. "Luna," he murmured, his voice gruff, but filled with a profound respect she hadn't heard in weeks. "You came." He rose, his gaze sweeping over her, assessing her readiness. "The king is with Lorien, preparing for the ritual. The blight is worsening. They believe the Luna's blood will turn the tide." His words were heavy with sorrow, a confirmation of Barrick's desperate delusion. "The tunnels from here lead outside the keep walls, but they are treacherous. And the blight has seeped in, even here." He gestured to a side passage, darker and even narrower than the one she'd navigated. A faint, sickly luminescence, like phosphorescent moss, glowed from within, and from its depths, Kessa heard it. A low, guttural moan, followed by a frantic, clawing sound. It was the same sound she'd heard days ago from beneath her chambers. It was a creature in agony, a wolf shifter, twisted and broken by the blight. "What is that?" she whispered, her blood running cold. Rorik's face hardened, his jaw clenching. "The blight does more than just sicken the land, Luna. It corrupts the very essence of a shifter. It turns them feral, mindless, driven by a constant, agonizing hunger. That is what Barrick is trying to stop, what he is trying to save us from." He paused, his gaze meeting hers, filled with a deep, unsettling sadness. "And that, Luna, is one of his sons." The revelation hit Kessa like a physical blow. Barrick's son, afflicted by the blight, driven mad. The king's desperation, his willingness to sacrifice her, suddenly made a horrifying, agonizing sense. He wasn't just protecting his kingdom, he was protecting his family, his bloodline, from an unspeakable horror. But the understanding did nothing to lessen the terror. It only made her escape, her defiance, 1,000 times more agonizing, tinged with a fresh wave of guilt and a renewed, profound sorrow for the man she was leaving behind. As Rorik led her towards the glowing, moaning passage, the tunnel ahead seemed to pulse with a malevolent life, the chilling truth of the blight's ultimate horror now laid bare before her. The passage Rorik led Kessa into was a gaping maw swallowed by a sickly, phosphorescent glow. It was a hellish light, emanating from a fungus that coated the damp stone walls, casting long, grotesque shadows that writhed with the faint guttural moans from deeper within. The air was thick, heavy with the sickly sweet odor of decay, laced with the metallic tang of ozone and something else, a primal stench of madness and suffering. Her wolf, usually a source of quiet strength, was now an unleashed beast, its instincts screaming a desperate warning. The knowledge that Barrick's son, his flesh and blood, was somewhere in this blighted darkness, consumed by this horror, twisted Kessa's heart with a fresh wave of agonizing despair. "Stay close, Luna," Rorik growled, his voice rough, pulling a heavy, rusted iron bar across a hidden entrance behind them. The clang echoed, a final, definitive severing from the keep and all she had known. He drew the ceremonial silver dagger Kessa had found in the box, and its etched blade glinting ominously in the eerie light. "The blight corrupts the mind first, then the body. They are no longer our kin." They moved in silence, their footsteps muffled by the damp earth and decaying leaves that littered the tunnel floor. The passage was narrow, winding, and treacherous, forcing Kessa to move in a crouch, her hands brushing against the slimy, glowing walls. The air grew colder, heavier, each breath a struggle. From deeper within, the moans intensified, becoming frantic whimpers, interspersed with ragged snarls. The metallic scent of blood grew stronger, mingling with the putrid sweetness of the blight. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the gloom ahead. It was a shifter, but barely recognizable. Its fur was matted and dull, patches of skin raw and weeping. Its eyes, once vibrant with wolfen life, were milky white, devoid of reason, fixed on some unseen torment. It thrashed against heavy chains bolted to the tunnel wall, its body contorted in agony, its limbs twitching uncontrollably. The sound it made was not a howl, but a choked, rasping whine, a plea for release. Kessa froze, a gasp caught in her throat. The sight was horrifying, the essence of a proud shifter reduced to this tortured husk. Her wolf recoiled in profound grief and terror. This was the Blight's true face, the monster Barrack was fighting. And in that moment, she understood the depths of his desperation, the unimaginable burden he carried. He wasn't just losing his kingdom, he was losing his family, his people, his very soul to this creeping plague. The understanding was a double-edged sword. It explained his actions, but it did not excuse the sacrifice he demanded. "Keep moving, Luna," Rorik urged, his hand on her arm, his grip firm. He kept his gaze fixed on the afflicted shifter, a sorrowful grimace on his face. "We cannot help them now, their minds are gone." They pressed on, passing other such horrors, each chained and suffering, their forms grotesque parodies of the proud shifters they once were. The tunnel became a gallery of despair, a testament to the Blight's insidious power. Kessa felt her resolve harden, tempered by the inferno of fear and sorrow. She would not become one of them. She would not be Barrack's sacrifice, not if it meant perpetuating this madness. Her survival was not just for herself. It was a defiance against the Blight's victory, a refusal to let it claim another soul. The passage began to ascend, the air growing marginally fresher, the glowing moss giving way to patches of black, damp stone. Hope, a fragile, persistent thing, flickered within her. Just as she allowed herself a moment of relief, a sudden, powerful tremor shook the tunnel. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and a low, distant rumble echoed through the earth. "The king knows," Rorik whispered, his eyes wide with alarm. "He is searching. We must hurry." They scrambled upwards, the ascent becoming steeper, the air growing lighter, hinting at the outside world. Kessa could almost taste the crisp night air, smell the pine and damp earth of the forest. The exit was close. Finally, a faint sliver of moonlight pierced through a tangle of roots and earth above them. With a surge of renewed strength, Kessa pushed upwards, clawing her way through the last few feet of earth, feeling the cold night air wash over her face. She emerged into a small, secluded clearing at the base of a towering ancient oak, its gnarled branches reaching towards the colossal hunter's moon. The air was clean, sharp with the scent of pine and damp earth, a stark contrast to the putrid confines of the tunnel. Rorik followed, his heavy frame scraping through the narrow opening. He immediately scanned their surroundings, his eyes sharp, his senses alert. "We are out, Luna. But we are not safe. The king's scent will be on us. He will be furious." Kessa looked back at the keep, a dark silhouette against the moonlit sky, its windows like empty eyes watching her. A pang of raw grief, sharper than any blade, pierced her heart. She had left him. She had left her mate, the man who, despite his monstrous choice, was fighting a losing battle against a horror that had claimed his own son. The bond, though fractured, still pulsed, a desperate, agonizing pull between them. "He will hunt us," Kessa said, her voice hollow. "Yes," Rorik confirmed, his hand resting on the hilt of his dagger. "He will send his best. And Lorien will be at his side, whispering his poison. We need to reach the ancient sanctuary of the Grey Cloaks, deep in the northern wilds. Only they understand the old ways, the true magic, not this barbaric ritual." As he spoke, a new scent drifted on the wind, faint yet unmistakable, the unique, powerful musk of Barrack, mixed with the sharp, acrid scent of fury. It was closer than Kessa had anticipated, far too close. A guttural roar ripped through the night, echoing from the direction of the keep. It was a sound of pure, unbridled rage, a sound that spoke of a king betrayed, an alpha denied. It was Barrack. He had found them. Kessa's eyes darted toward the sound, then to the dense, shadow-choked forest surrounding the clearing. The moonlight, once a beacon of hope, now seemed to illuminate their vulnerability. There was no time. The forest was their only hope. Rorik grabbed her arm, his eyes urgent. "Run, Luna, run!" But as they turned to plunge into the trees, a massive dark form detached itself from the deepest shadows at the edge of the clearing. It was not a wolf, but a man, impossibly tall, his shoulders broad, his powerful frame radiating a furious primal energy. His face was a mask of granite, eyes burning with a cold, terrifying intensity that promised retribution. His dark hair, usually neat, was wild, wind-whipped, framing a face contorted with barely restrained fury. The scent of him, raw and untamed, choked the air, obliterating all other smells. Kessa, Barrick's voice, a low, dangerous growl, cut through the night. He stepped into the moonlight, his presence dominating the clearing, a mythical beast unleashed. And behind him, not Lorien, but a small, shadowy pack of his most loyal hunters, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, their forms shifting, ready to strike. You cannot escape your destiny. You are mine. The words were an alpha's claim, cold and absolute, laced with a raw possessiveness that sent a tremor of both fear and a strange, unwelcome surge of primal recognition through Kessa. He was not just hunting her, he was reclaiming her. And in his eyes, she saw not only anger, but a profound, desperate pain that mirrored her own. The bond, though wounded, snapped taut between them, vibrating with an ancient, dangerous power that threatened to consume them both. The hunter's moon hung overhead, a silent witness to the inevitable confrontation, a battle for her life, her freedom, and the very soul of their fractured bond. The clearing pulsed with the raw, untamed fury of an alpha denied. Barrick stood before Kessa, a monolith of rage and despair, his powerful frame radiating a primal energy that threatened to shatter the very air. His eyes, burning with a terrifying intensity, were fixed on her, claiming, condemning. Behind him, the shadowy forms of his hunters shifted, their predatory instincts honed, ready to obey. Rorik, ever vigilant, stood between Kessa and the encroaching pack, his silver dagger a cold gleam in the moonlight, a silent promise of defiance. The air crackled with a tension so profound it felt like a physical weight, pressing down on Kessa, suffocating her. You cannot escape your destiny, Kessa. Barrick's voice was a low growl, echoing the feral snarl of her own inner wolf. You are mine. But Kessa, battered and bruised by betrayal, found a strength she hadn't known she possessed. Her wolf, no longer cowering, rose within her, fierce and unyielding. She met his gaze, her own eyes blazing with a potent mix of terror and righteous fury. Destiny, she spat, the word tasting like ash. Or the twisted lies of a charlatan, Barrick? I saw your son chained and suffering in those tunnels. I smelled the blight's true corruption. Is this what you call destiny? Sacrificing your mate, your Luna, on the word of a man who twists ancient lore for his own dark ends? Her words struck him like a physical blow. Barrick faltered, a flicker of raw pain momentarily breaking through the mask of fury. His head snapped towards Rorik. What lies has she fed you, old wolf? Before Rorik could answer, a chilling, triumphant laugh echoed from the tree line. Lorien stepped into the clearing, his features illuminated by the sinister glow of the blight fungus that clung to his robes. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, now gleamed with a manic glee. The Luna is insightful, my king, he purred, his voice dripping with venom. But her insight changes nothing. The prophecy demands blood, her blood, and the solstice moon ensures its power. As Lorien spoke, a subtle shift occurred in the air. The blight-tainted fungus on his robes seemed to pulse, and the familiar, sickly sweet scent intensified, sickening Kessa. Rorik, seeing the telltale glow, let out a guttural snarl. He is touched by the blight himself, King Barrick. He twists the prophecy for his own power, to spread the darkness. Barrick's gaze, sharp and suddenly clear, snapped between Lorien's glowing robes and Rorik's desperate plea. The fury in his eyes began to recede, replaced by a dawning horror, a chilling realization. He took a step back from Lorien, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of his own dagger. The ancient text spoke of Aluna's lifeblood, Rorik pressed, his voice urgent. The essence of her connection to the land and the pack, harnessed in a ritual of renewal, not sacrifice. Lorien has twisted it, King, to drain the pack's strength, to spread the blight through false hope. The revelation hit Barrick with the force of a thunderclap. The anguish on his face was profound, mirroring the agony Kessa had seen on his blighted son. His shoulders slumped, the weight of his terrible error crushing him. He looked at Kessa, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading grief. Kessa, my son. He is not beyond saving, Kessa said, her voice softer now, seeing the torment in his eyes. The true ritual, it calls for the Luna's living spirit, her connection to the earth, to draw out the blight, not to feed it with death. It calls for the Alpha and Luna, united, to mend the bond between the pack and the land. Lorien, seeing his deception unravel, snarled, lunging forward with a hidden blade, aiming for Kessa. But Beric, his instincts now clear, moved with the speed of a true alpha. He intercepted Lorien, his roar shaking the clearing. A furious battle ensued, brief but brutal, as Beric, fueled by a renewed sense of purpose and a burning need for redemption, overpowered the deceitful advisor. Lorien, weakened by the blight he cultivated, fell, his body dissolving into a black, acrid smoke that quickly dissipated, leaving only the lingering stench of corruption. With Lorien gone, the air in the clearing seemed to lighten, the oppressive weight lifting. Beric turned to Kessa, his chest heaving, his eyes still haunted by his near-fatal mistake. He dropped to one knee before her, an act of humility and raw contrition that tore at her heart. "My Luna," he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. I was lost, blinded by fear for our son, for our people." He whispered promises of salvation, and I lost my way. I broke our bond. I nearly lost you. Can you ever forgive me?" His gaze, once so cold, was now openly vulnerable, filled with a desperate plea for absolution. Kessa looked down at him, her heart aching. The man she loved, scarred and burdened, had nearly sacrificed her for a twisted lie, driven by a father's desperate love. The pain of his betrayal was still a raw wound, but beneath it, she saw the true Beric, the alpha who would sacrifice his own soul for his pack. And she knew, with a primal certainty, that their bond, though fractured, was not yet broken. "Rise, my king," she whispered, her hand reaching out, not to strike but to cup his cheek. His skin was warm, rough beneath her touch, and for the first time in weeks, the familiar comfort of his scent flooded her senses, untainted by deceit. "Forgiveness is a long path, Beric, but the blight still consumes our son, our pack. We must mend this together." That night, under the benevolent gaze of the solstice moon, Kessa and Beric, side by side, performed the true ritual of renewal. Not with a silver dagger and blood, but with their joined hands pressed against the ancient oak at the heart of the blighted gardens, their combined Alpha and Luna essence flowing into its roots. Kessa channeled the deep, primal connection of her wolf to the earth, drawing on the life force of the land, while Beric poured his boundless strength and fierce protectiveness into the bond, intertwining their spirits. The chant was not of sacrifice, but of life, of rebirth, a powerful song sung by the loyal few, led by Rorik, who gathered around them. As their combined power surged, the blighted gray film on the oak began to recede, revealing vibrant, verdant bark beneath. A faint golden glow emanated from the tree, spreading outwards, chasing away the sickly luminescence of the blight. The withered rose bushes unfurled new green shoots, their delicate scent filling the night air. The cries from the tunnels below slowly diminished, replaced by sounds of peaceful slumber. Then, miraculously, the weak, confused whimpers of shifters slowly regaining their minds. Days turned into weeks. The blight, driven back by the renewed life force of Ashcombe, slowly retreated from the land. Beric's son, along with the other afflicted shifters, returned from the tunnels, their bodies scarred, their memories hazy but their minds clear, their wolf spirit slowly healing. Beric, humbled and forever changed, never again made a decision without Kessa by his side. Their bond, once bleeding and fractured, had been reforged in the fires of near destruction. It was deeper now, stronger, built on a foundation of brutal honesty and unwavering trust. Kessa was no longer just his Luna, she was his co-ruler, her wisdom, her intuition, and her profound connection to the pack and the land celebrated and revered. She had taught him that true strength lay not in solitude and veiled secrets, but in shared vulnerability and the unbreakable power of their connection. 1 year later, under a vibrant, life-giving moon, Kessa stood on the battlements of Ashcombe Keep, Beric's arm a warm, possessive weight around her waist. The land below them was lush and green, the forest teeming with life, the crops bursting from the soil. The scent of pine and fresh earth mingled with the sweet perfume of the thriving rose gardens. Beside them, their son, now fully healed, his eyes bright with wolfen spirit, laughed as he wrestled playfully with Rorik's pup. Beric turned to her, his stormy gray eyes now filled with a warmth that mirrored the love in her own heart. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear, My Kessa, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. My Luna. You saved us all, you saved me. She turned in his embrace, her fingers tracing the familiar lines of his scarred face. We saved each other, my king, she whispered, her heart overflowing. Always, together. His lips claimed hers, a kiss of profound apology, of fierce love, of an unbreakable bond that had survived the darkest of nights to emerge, stronger and more radiant, in the dawn of a new era for Ashcombe. The scars remained, both on the land and in their hearts, but they were now marks of resilience, testaments to a love that had defied death and forged a new, unbreakable destiny.